How wonderful to see everybody. Buenos dias, bonjour, guten tag, ni hao, and anything else, galimera. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Parthena Draggett. You are my colleagues, my wonderful, precious Stark County colleagues, and I'm so happy to be part of this Stark County High Impact Conference for Educators 2021. When Dana contacted me and told me that I guess somebody had requested me there to be part of this conference, I was so pleased because I have always missed Stark County since I left 6 years ago, not quite 6 years ago, but this is my 6 year away. And I like nothing more than to keep my connections with my home. So today I will be presenting. For those of you who don't know me, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. But first, let's take a look at this title, Empowering Learners Through Effective Feedback, Reflection, and Goal Setting. It is so important that our students be part of their learning process, that they take ownership, because then when they really understand what proficiency is, they will seek to improve. So we engage them here in the gray in the process, in the growth process, and they will amaze you, as I have seen, and I'm sure many of you have seen already. You'll notice that under my name, there is no school right now. This is my first year as a retired from school person. Hasn't been too easy on me because it's also COVID, had I known, right? But I am a consultant now. I always have been a consultant, but now that's what I do exclusively. Here you can see some pictures that I wanted to share with you as I talk a little bit about my experience. I do have 39 plus years in education. And I have a story to tell. All of us do, right? How we changed as teachers over the years, how we move more toward proficiency. I can say this to all of you, there is no better time than now to be a world language educator. There is no better time to be teaching world languages. You should have been there when I was thrown out of the classroom in 1976. There were no standards. There were no guidelines. Yeah, we had some classes, in methodology, but it was pretty weak. But we all did well, except that back then it was very grammar translation. I think some of us knew better and taught better anyway. But I can tell you that over the years, as we had our first standards and as we developed a lot of, I guess, alignment, in the world language learning world, and as we made changes at the national level with ACTFL and at the state level, every little change has taken us further and brought us to where we are today. And I really wish I were starting my career today because there is no better time for all of you young teachers. This is the best. You can see me here in my classroom at Jackson High School. Okay. When I first started teaching there, we had an old building. And as you can see, my heart is still in Ohio. I lived in Ohio until I retired, from the time I was born until I retired from Jackson. And it is dear to my heart. You can see that I was even chosen as the Ohio World Language Teacher of the Year in 2015, which made my decision to leave even harder. But one thing I want you to see in this picture are these little posters, because we worked at the state level. Way back, starting with Debbie Robinson, I remember working at the state level on, lingua folio, on our standards. I was part of an original model lesson writing team. Well, I did that again, more later on. And when I did retire, moved to Florida, I was a part of the network of regional leaders. And there in Stark County, I'm so proud to say that I was one of the lead people, I guess I would say, along with my dear friend, Dina Kramer, whom I miss. I don't know if you're watching, Dina. But we had such a robust group of teachers working in Ohio, in Stark County. About, I think, 17 or 18 schools sent teachers regularly to our meetings. Everything that was going on in the country with language learning over the years, we tackled in the county together. And it was wonderful, that that collaboration across schools. Everything from our standards all the way to credit flex, we would work on together. So I'm very proud of that and very happy to be back with you today. But this whole thing of showing you the can-do statements, or I can statements back then from Lingua Folio, is that, those have changed and we have new ones now, and they're the 2017 accessible ACTFL statements, but they really were based on work that we worked on, years ago with Lingua Folio. But I was a happy camper in that classroom and I love my school. I think my journey to effective teaching and student proficiency, really, there were some major events that took place that I think helped mold that for me. One was attending an Ohio SchoolNet conference back in the 1990s. And when I came back full of ideas, thinking, how can I make language more meaningful to students? I engaged my dear colleague, Humphrey Fraudel, and we developed a virtual learning experience. And that is still going on at Jackson High School today with Amy Drea and Stella Munoz and Humphrey. Because we had students doing more authentic activities and looking at authentic texts and simulating moving abroad. I mean, that was something because our textbooks were so bad back then. Well, now I think we have some really good textbooks that are very proficiency oriented and actually based on authentic resources. I even author some. I don't know if you know Temas and Tem, for instance. But going back to that, another event that I think made a big difference for me was when I got my first national board certification, and I had to reflect on everything I did, writing those entries. I lived in my pajamas for weekends writing those things. But you know, that's a process that never stopped. I reflect all the time, anything I'm doing. And the next thing was starting the AP program at Jackson and realizing quickly that, you know what? We think our kids know more, but they're really not ready for this. And we started out as a department working on vertical alignment. We got so strong, amazing, amazing. And Stella and Amy and Humphrey and everybody there at Jackson continues that. The wonderful French and Chinese teachers, we even had AP Chinese when I left. It was wonderful. And it was wonderful being their department chair and leading that. Well, I was happy camper, and then I was called by this school, the Community School of Naples. I was emailed, I ignored them. Then they said again, don't you remember us? We had lunch together at the Embassy of Spain lunch, and we heard you present. We want you to be our department chair. Somehow they got me on a plane. I came down to visit. The offer was so good. And we were, 30 years. I was at 30 years teaching in Ohio, 30 years teaching high school, plus 4 years at university level. And my husband was wide-eyed, can't we go? Can't we go? And so I decided to accept their offer. So after teaching 34 years here, I added 5 years to the Community School of Naples. As their department chair, I managed department of pre-K 3 up through 12, all the languages we had, and still continued teaching AP Spanish and a couple of other courses, including I got to get back into my French. Anyway, that's enough about me. I just want you to know I have a long career, a lot of experience, and I've gone through every little transition and change to bring us to where we are today. That ODE website that you have, you're going to see me referring to a lot of documents from it, which I always use in my presentations, not just because you're Ohio lead or you're the Stark County lead teachers. For instance, I was in Moscow giving a week-long professional development workshop in September of 2018, and they saw the ODE mentioned on my slides and said, we know, they told me it was the Anglo-American School of Moscow. We know the ODE. We use that website all the time. Imagine the far-reaching presence and influence that the model curriculum from our state of Ohio has on teachers all around the world. You are in the best state for teaching languages. And now I'll get off my soapbox and let's move on. So, essential questions. I always love to run my workshops with essential questions. Here are 3 for our use today. What is the motivational classroom that inspires learning? How do we engage students to reflect on their own learning and set goals for growth? What does student reflection look like? We're going to drill into each one of these, starting with this first essential question, okay? If we create a motivational classroom and a classroom that really engages our learners, we will help them reach for the stars in communication and keep going up that proficiency scale. Would you please pause for a minute and reflect? You can close your eyes if you wish and think about, what is a motivational classroom to you? You can think of the physical classroom, but also think about a classroom meeting time and what you think that should encompass. Just briefly reflect. Thank you. And I have a secondary question here. And it is really a rhetorical question for me right now. I'm going to have you reflect on it, but I'm going to revisit it on one of my slides later. How do we define learning when it comes to world languages? Think of one phrase or idea that comes to mind when you define learning for world languages. Thank you. So we have come a long way. You heard me referring to, my time in the 70s. Take a look. Well, this wasn't the 70s. This is from a movie you probably have heard of, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. My daughters used to enjoy it, howl at it. And this is that terrible drone monotone teacher they had. Well, no wonder the kids look so unmotivated. They weren't engaged. It was a teacher talking head in front of the classroom. None of our classrooms are like that today, right? Our classrooms engage more learners all at once. We create situations for them where they are more engaged. Certainly, sometimes we have those teachable moments. Certainly, sometimes we're questioning students still, but none of our students look like this. Instead, this is more of what we see in our classrooms today. This is a student-led discussion. My Spanish 4 students happily engaged. I don't have, I'm not going to go into what they're discussing. I have a project that I actually presented last in Salamanca, Spain, during the 100th year anniversary of AATSP. But this is a student-led discussion thing, all front-loaded with lots of research, authentic resources. But suffice it to say, we front-loaded, we have it already, but students lead the discussions, and we have them periodically. And that is what is going on here. And they love those days because they can speak a lot and they don't have to raise their hand like this little girl. She's just very polite. She's actually a little girl from France in a Spanish classroom. But it's the idea that the students are front and center. They are engaged in creating communication and how wonderful that is. This is our classroom of today. Another thing that I think is very important in motivating students is helping them to understand where they are. How in the world can they improve and go forward if they don't understand their own proficiency? Something happened with my screen sharing. It's back. Sorry. I was trying to move a little bar out of my way that you can't see. But anyway. So one graphic that I have found is really helpful with this is this one that I believe I got off Teachers Pay Teachers, although it's not one of my favorite places to go. I like to share my goods without paying for them. But anyway, there are novice, intermediate, and low, and advanced, excuse me, and that each has a low, mid, high, and gives a little description of what students can do. And I'm not going to read it because I know you can study it and read it later. Something I would like to mention that I didn't mention, this is being recorded in April for you watching it in June, and you're going to have an unconference. I think you're going to meet. I won't be able to be there with you because I'll be at the AP reading. I'm a table leader at the reading, but maybe you can discuss this a little bit there. And you can certainly watch this presentation as much as you want. For any of my slides or any of my materials, you can also, I'm going to give you the PowerPoint itself, because I think that would be helpful. And some of the handouts of things that I show screenshots of, I'll give you. Anyway, the novice learner's the pair, right? It's mostly memorized bits of information. They've learned how they fit and work into questions and answers. There is speaking in phrases by novice high, but they're usually memorized. And they can ask simple questions, right? But this is the reason I like this visual so much. Do you see how can I jump a level? Whoever conceived this did such a beautiful job on this, telling them, giving them some advice to move up. Same thing here, to move up all the way up the scale. Notice how it's stepped because it is a process, and I'm going to refer to that often in this presentation. Your intermediate learner is a survivor. They're independent. They can get along. They can go to Europe, go to Latin America, go to China. They can use their language to get their needs met. Maybe not perfectly. They're going to make a lot of mistakes, but they are understood. And I'm not going to go into what each one says because I know you've already studied the proficiency levels, and that isn't really what I want to spend so much time on. I'm going to get to the reflection. But you can read about this later and see. We do know most of our high school learners, if they have let's say a 7 through 12 sequence, which I think most of our schools do nowadays. Down here I was lucky enough to have K through 12. At Jackson, we were lucky enough to have 6 through 12. And then with the Sociedad teaching the students, there are even some lower students that learn. But anyway, most of us are lucky to get our kids to intermediate high. I do know that while I was at Jackson, I had kids that came into the advanced low territory. Even after only 5 years, they were just extremely motivated learners. And I know because, of their AP scores, you can get a 5 in the exam though and still be intermediate high. Depends on, I won't go into AP right now, but it depends on the strength of that 5, where they are. But we know that in a typical program, we're all hoping to get our kids up here. We hope, to get them in here, I would say most of us. All right. But this graphic really helps students to see what is it I need to do to get that next level. I'm going to show you some others like that too. Another graphic and proficiency, when I think of proficiency that I think is important, is to empower our students to really understand what do they communicate about. And I'm going to show you 2 graphics from ACTFL. The first one is already showing here, but I want to come over to the left first and comment on that. My proficiency level means the student's proficiency level. Remember, it's not about us. It's about them. So they need a deep understanding that they are about communication. Taking a language is not just to get into college or to meet some kind of a graduation requirement. It is really, in our way of thinking, I try to get my students to think this way about their communication. Communication is central. I like to bring cultures in here too, because remember, we are mostly world language and cultures departments, and that culture is very strong. The next graphic I'm going to show you brings that in more. But we have the 3 modes of communication and the 2 skills within each mode. And then around the outside, we have the other C's, the other 4 C's. Although, as I stated, I like to bring culture into the middle. I like the kids to understand what this is all about. That when we talk about connections, we're making connections to other disciplines. I mean, where else but in a world language classroom do we discuss art and music and literature and mathematics and sciences and biology and all of that, global issues, technology, families and communities, whatever you want, we discuss it. It's all of it is present in our classroom, right? It is important for students to realize that what they communicate about and what the cultural knowledge they seek has to do a lot with connections. And they make comparisons. And yes, we do have the cultural comparison task in the AP exam, but it's not just about comparing cultures, although that is important. The students can do that. We compare foods, we compare sports, we compare holidays, lots of different things. The one that I think is so important that we sometimes leave behind is communities. I think that when students realize that what they're learning in school, that we help take them outside the classroom, scale those classroom walls and put them in the community. That can be done through Skype, bringing in guest speakers and teachers from, other countries. It could be done with something like what my Sociedad Honoraria Hispánica did when I was at Jackson, and the Jackson EMS came to us from the Jackson Fire Department and said, we need help communicating with Spanish speakers when we go to accidents. And my students work with them for 2 years. We've made them CDs and posters for their emergency vehicles, that help them, guide them how to say to somebody, I need to examine you. I need to touch you. What level is your pain? Something like, have you taken Viagra? Because that's going to be important for my students. Learn to teach them. They told us what they needed and we presented that. And you know how my students felt? Valued. They thought, my goodness, me teaching them Spanish, my knowing my Spanish could help save a life. That is important for us to show students that there are people who, they're going to use this for real purposes, for real purpose. And the more that we can show them that before high school is over, the more that we can show them that when they're with us, the more that they'll want to learn and be engaged. Another graphic I like is this one, and this is Terrell and Clementi. This is in one of their keys to the classroom. And this, we still have, the 5 C's around the outside and the 3 modes here, but this takes more of a cultural, interculturality, I'd say, twist to it. Because this nucleus, within this nucleus, we see the I. And my interpretation, the I is I, knowing myself, but it is also investigate, when I explore other communities, and interact as I engage with the world. Those 2 terms, investigate and interact, are part of the intercultural can-do statements. So this brings culture front and center. And so I like to have the students understand all of this, how important it is. So I told you later we would do a little reflection on what a motivational classroom is, and I'd like to define for you what I see a motivational classroom as. It inspires interaction and engagement. I don't know if that was in any of you when you were reflecting. It gives students the floor and an important creative voice. It makes the teacher a facilitator, a coach, and a cheerleader. It promotes risk-taking and eager participation. They know they're going to communicate and they're excited to be there and be a part of class, not just laying there, disengaged. It focuses on students as primary and the teacher as secondary communicators. It celebrates each stride, each step toward proficiency. We give aplausos in my classroom, about, this is so wonderful. Listen to that risk you took. It allows for errors and even celebrates them as necessary steps toward learning. We do not focus on errors, we focus on communication. And the errors, we model corrections where necessary. We absolutely do that. We don't want to let them go, but we don't want to focus on them so much that we shut our students down. And we give students choice in learning and assessment. It is not a one-size-fits-all classroom. And boy, have we learned that in the last year, right? In over a year ago, in mid-March, I think it was March 13th last year, we were told at the community school that we were going out and going to be learning virtual. I think the rest of the world was doing the same thing, or the rest of the United States was anyway. And I all of a sudden had to teach my students on a computer, and I didn't get them as often because they had so many classes, and we tried to diminish screen time, and I had my synchronous and asynchronous work. Well, I made the decision to retire January of last year. I didn't retire officially until June. I was still assessing students all summer, coming to our school and all that. But one thing I knew was that when my teachers came back in September, and as I was having department meetings last spring, I was saying this to them, you might see a difference. You will see a difference in the student preparation, because some did not embrace virtual learning very well. We had students with all kinds of things going on. So we have had to really learn that more than ever, that it's not one size fits all, right? Some of you right now are teaching, in a hybrid situation where some students are in school and some students are at home. And you may still find that those at-home learners are not as engaged or learning as much as the students in school. So we have to understand that our students are not all in the same place. This is a good time to have that conversation with the students and to know coming back next year, we're filling those gaps. Sure you are. You are doing a great job. In fact, stop right now and give yourselves a pat on the back. What you have endured, what we all endured last spring, and what you're doing now. I mean, we had enough challenges and now we have more, because now you're dealing with all different learning situations, different kinds of test situations, standing on your heads, doing all you can for your students because you love them. And you are doing a wonderful job. But I think it's okay to recognize they're not all going to be the same, even though they came out of the same class. So what I like to tell my students, and I always told them this anyway, don't pay attention to how anybody else around you is doing or where he or she is in communication. Let's focus on you. Where are you, and what do we need to take you forward? That is what it is all about. And this is where this reflection is really important, because every student is going to find, some different results. And that depends on whether it's, for example, interpersonal speaking or writing, presentational speaking or writing, interpretive listening, reading, audiovisual, whatever it is, they're all over the place. So let's help them figure out where they are and help them go forward. This, I believe, if we really focus on reflection, is going to help us through this process. Let's go to the second essential question. How do we engage students in reflecting on their own learning and growth? Okay, that's what we want them to do. That is the goal. I have the graphic of the cover of the ACTful and Assessful can-do statements here for a reason. I use them all the time. I use them in every lesson, every day. Do I always have the students do the reflection on them? Somehow, yes, whether it be just a quick thumbs up, thumbs down, an exit ticket or something, and sometimes much more involved, actually, writing me something. It just depends. But I think if we start with the can-do statements, know where they are, and they help us know where they are and plan direction. As I have told my students many times, and I don't know where I first heard this, but there is no elevator to proficiency. We have to take the stairs to get there. They don't remember that they took those same stairs to get there in their first language when they were little children and just learning to speak, and made all kinds of mistakes, but they took risks and they were corrected, right? It's important. One thing I think with this hybrid learning or virtual learning is I saw a little bit more of students trying to take those shortcuts, trying to take an elevator that doesn't exist for proficiency, a little more use of Google Translate. I think the kids were frustrated at home, all of that. And I had to have some frank talks with them about it. And I said to them, maybe for this particular assignment, I mean, I could tell, and I told them, and they redid them, and all that kind of thing. But in the end, you're only cheating yourself, because it's going to show on AP exam day or on the stamp test. We always gave the stamp every year in the spring at CSN to measure growth from the year before. What do you think was going to happen on that? Or on some integrated performance assessment I gave them, or some, something that I give them to do right with me, it's going to show. So don't do that. But take the steps. Those steps are important. Each one of them, even if you fall and stumble, it's an important fall. It's an important stumble to pick yourself back up again and learn from that. And, it doesn't it doesn't hurt, to tell them about some great things out there, like the state seal of biliteracy, the global seal of biliteracy, something like the National Spanish Exam medals that these students are wearing, or perhaps a scholarship from the Société Honoraire de Français, or the Sociedad Honoraria Hispánica. Scholarships available if you do well, maybe getting published in Albricias or something. Let them know there's some things out there, but let them know the greater good, that they can make a difference in their communities by knowing how to communicate with people from so many different backgrounds. They can, in whatever future field they have, be much more engaged with their clients if they can speak with them, or their patients, or whatever it happens to be. Going back to those can-do statements, I'm not giving a presentation today on how to use them. I'm going to be referring to them a lot, but I know that you have our wonderful Kathy Shelton and Ryan Wirtz, who were very involved in all of these, in writing a lot of the information that is at the state level and at the national level on them. I have an arrow going straight to what I want you to see. Learners set learning goals and regularly chart their own progress with can-do statements. That's the way I like to use them. Through reflection, they identify what it takes to advance. And I'm going to be showing you some materials to help you with that, and give you some links for the ODE, because that's what I always use. If you don't know enough about necessful, actful, can-do statements, make sure that you contact Kathy Shelton or Ryan at the ODE, see what's out there, what kind of training's out there, do something at lead teachers with them if you would. I'm sure you have some very good people there that can do PD. Call me if you need. We can always add something in later, but they're pretty powerful. Do you know why they're powerful? Because it is not about conjugating verbs or memorizing vocabulary. It's about communication. I can interact with others I can interact with the waiter in a restaurant and order food. I can make a phone call and make a reservation in a hotel. I can tell my best friend about my fishing trip last weekend in the mountains. I can write a paragraph about my goals for next year, what I will do. It's all about communication. It's not about I memorized a verb in the future tense. No. So it really puts the communication in a way that students understand that they're going to be communicating. It's not about the nuts and bolts or the discrete grammar features or vocabulary features. So how do we use them? For students use them to self-assess language proficiency and performance, and I'm going to show you how I do that. And they can use them to set goals for how to progress to the next level. Teachers use them for 3 reasons: as predictors of proficiency growth, because we see the big picture out there, like, it even goes to superior and distinguished now. For setting learning targets for our students as we look at those benchmarks, and as sample activities. When you look at those can-dos where it drills down into like actual activities, they help us as teachers to give us some ideas for some things we can do with our students, which are very communicative, not based on grammar and vocabulary. And this is just a shot, I'm sure you've seen this a million times, from the necessful, actful, can-do statements. I chose this view for you because it shows novice and intermediate, and no matter who we are, like I always taught 2 AP language and culture classes and even AP literature classes, but I always had also maybe a Spanish 3 or a 4 or a 2 or something, or a French 2 or something else along with my teaching. I think all of us have students every year at these proficiency levels, right? Intermediate, we all have. If you're teaching, lower levels, beginning levels, you probably have a lot of novice. But it's important for students to know, where am I now and what does that mean? Because our role is to help our students understand that so they know how to build on it. And I show you this because this is like a front page on proficiency benchmarks, because it has the 3 modes of communication, also has the investigate, interact for the intercultural can-dos. And today I'm actually going to be referring to these 2 for one of my students that I'm going to show you. Here we are drilling a little deeper into it. If we just want to look at intermediate, interpersonal, we're going to take a look at one of my students doing some interpersonal speaking. I can participate in spontaneous spoken, written, or signed conversations on familiar topics, creating sentences in a series of sentences to ask and answer a variety of questions. Now, my particular student's more here, moving to here. Okay, this is my target, but this is where we start. And we have 3 other guiding questions here, depending on level. As you can read this, I'm sure, I can interact with others to meet my basic needs. This is a basic need of getting food in familiar situations by creating simple sentences and asking and answering appropriate follow-up questions. And here's the one that I'm really focusing on today. I can interact with a waiter to order a meal at a restaurant. But look at all these other wonderful ones. And you would have these for novice and for advanced as well. This one is interpersonal, but also in the project I'm going to show you, we have presentational. So I also have one pointed out to you here. I won't read this one to save time. I know you can all read, and you know these already anyway. You probably know them very well. I will come down here. I can express my preferences on familiar and everyday topics of interest and explain why I feel that way using simple sentences. This is actually my target because some of my students could actually get here, some are here, but I was targeting. I always like to build in reach. I build my assessments where the students can spread their wings and fly and get to that reach, or give me a little bit less and still get a very good grade. Okay. State my viewpoint about familiar topics, in this case, a restaurant, using sentences and such. But here it is. I can give a presentation recommending something I like, a restaurant that I attended, and whether I would recommend it to somebody else. You can tailor these however you like. This was the project that I'm going to show you now, and I'm kind of showing you how I use the can-do statements. And this had both presentational and interpersonal, because the student had to go to a Spanish-speaking restaurant with a family, either the whole family or somebody in the family, and had to have a Spanish-speaking waiter, waitress, and had to follow some guidelines. You know, there was a preparing, a before filming in the restaurant, filming, things they had to do while they were there. They had to order from beverages all the way through dessert. They had to, you know, ask waiter questions. They had to, you know, ask for recommendations. They had to order for themselves and everybody else at the table. But then when the food came, they had to describe it. So that was kind of presentation. And at the end of the whole experience, and I won't go into the whole detail, sorry, this is in Spanish. I am going to give it in the folder for any Spanish teachers who want to use it. And teachers who aren't Spanish speaking here could always have somebody in the department help you if you'd like to do something similar. But the point is, there were a lot of different parts to this. And at the very end, once they left the restaurant, went home, they needed to do a little part of the video on whether they would recommend the restaurant or not to others and why. Give some evidence. And so this was the project. I'm not going to show you the whole video because this young lady, I think, turned in about a five-minute video to me. And by the way, there is a rubric on that guideline sheet as well that I use for this particular project. She makes lots of mistakes, but we understand her and she gets her needs met. And this is a Spanish 2 student. She's a freshman. Okay, so here we go.
Hola, me llamo Caroline Rubin y estoy en Casamigos, el restaurante favorito de mi madre y mi abuela. Ellos sirven el mejor fajitas en el mundo. Vengan conmigo. Hola, me llamo Caroline Rubin y esta es mi madre Ann. ¿Y cómo se llama?
Mi nombre es Juliana.
Gracias. Y mi madre quiere beber un agua con limón. Y yo también.
Ok, claro que sí. ¿Y quieres algo para empezar? ¿Un guacamole, queso?
¿Madre? Queso, por favor.
¿Queso? Claro que sí. Ya traigo las aguas y hay queso, ¿ok?
Sí, muchas gracias. Este es el agua de limón por mi madre y yo. Y este es el queso. El queso es de queso blanco y pimientos verdes. Y este es el salsa. El salsa es de tomato, cilantro, muchos diferentes, varios tipos de pimientos también. Y este es el chips de tortilla.
¿Están listos para ordenar?
Sí, ¿qué me recomiendas?
Ok, las fajitas son muy buenas. Tenemos diferentes fajitas: pollo, carne, combo o trío, pollo, carne y camarón.
Sí, los fajitas son mis favoritas.
Ok.
Yo quiero los fajitas de pollo.
Claro.
Y mi madre quiere los fajitas de bistec y pollo.
Okay.
Y para mi hermano no están aquí, pero él quiere una ensalada de taco con bistec y lechuga.
Claro. Para las fajitas, ¿quieres tortillas de harina o maíz?
Maíz, por favor.
Maíz. ¿La ensalada de taco es para llevar?
Sí.
Perfecto.
Okay, I'm going to stop it because we just stop her. You can watch it when you get the PowerPoint. If you want, you can watch the whole thing. This was toward the beginning of the year. It was actually, I think, in November that we did this. Okay, I know it looks tropical, but that's because we're in Naples, Florida. All right.
Hola,
Whoops, didn't want to do that. There we go. So I needed to help students understand what we were targeting for that project. And I'm going to show you what I used for that. And I did this using the can-do statements and them to see these as building blocks as they construct communication. And you're the foreman. We're the foremen, right? We teachers. It's a process. And we guide the students and help them, build their communication. These are on the Ohio Department of Education languages model curriculum, world languages model curriculum. There is a link here. And when you get my PowerPoint, you can actually click and go right there. But I love this because it shows the difference. First of all, it gives them some guiding questions. And I actually share this with my students for both interpersonal and presentational. I'm just going to show you the interpersonal one here for the interest of time. But I put little red dots for what I used. So right here, there's some guiding questions. How can I exchange information ideas? And the students can read the difference between the intermediate, low, and mid. And I was trying to get them to target here. Maybe some of you would, be going for something else. How can I meet my needs or address situations in conversation? How can I express, react to, and support preferences and opinions in conversation? Like when she said, las fajitas son mis favoritas or something like that. And there are also a couple for intercultural communication, like how can I use language and behavior to interact with others in and from another culture? So although we weren't in another culture, we're here in Naples, Florida, that server that she had was from another culture. So I think these are very appropriate. I kind of showed my students and I talked to them about where they are. And some of them are lower. I actually had to show some students the novice high as well. I kind of went over all of them with them. I have a lot of can-do statements posted in my classroom, all the different levels. Now for that project, I just showed you what I used. And I showed you, that I used a different rubric. It's actually I didn't show you the rubric, but there was a little bit different rubric because I actually developed that project with another teacher, a colleague of mine who also retired last year. And we both taught Spanish 2 honors and did the same project because, we always like to do things aligned and, work together. Anyway, here's another tool that you can use from the ODE that does, I guess, kind of focus on the idea of the student learning, okay, and giving reflection. I'll show you the other side for the reflection. And you could use these rubrics and they actually show you how to convert them to a gradebook score. Actually, I know I use these all the time. I can't remember if I used it for that or not right now, but this is more holistic. So it isn't just like interpersonal speaking, novice level, intermediate level. You can choose up here in the corner. And if you can see that, novice low, novice mid, all the way up to advanced low. And notice the descriptors: strong, good, developing, emerging, low. Hopefully we never have students there. Most of my students end up somewhere in here, depending on what it is. And what I also like about this, we have the task, the content, right? And notice right here, the arrows I've given you: novice interaction, intermediate interaction. What is the difference? And you can see that all the way down. Okay, same thing with vocabulary, language control, pronunciation, and fluency. If they're doing good, and what would they be doing if they're strong? See, so the kids can reflect this way, or at least see how they can bump it up, how they can ramp it up to improve. And then on the back, they have a chance to reflect. It's the same. So they would get this back from me, and I have circles all over it, wherever they are, on this part, going the wrong way. On this part right here, they have circles when they get their work back, or they get, an evaluation back. If it's writing, they get the work back. If it's speaking, then they just probably get this. But then I want them to start, now you listen to yourself and you look at what, where I think you are. Now cite something that cite what you're doing well, what your strengths are, but what are my goals? And notice it doesn't say, what are my mistakes or what are my weaknesses? Try to keep it positive. What are my goals? I love the way the ODE does that, meaning what do I need to improve? So this helps them because once again, they get this novice interaction, intermediate interaction, so they can see the differences. And I wanted to show you this just to see how students might fill that out. Now, it's not the same thing. It wasn't for the restaurant project. This was actually for a writing. I think it was actually an email reply that students wrote. And I believe this one was in, I think it was in my Spanish no, it was probably in my Spanish 2 honors again. Can't remember right now. I had this in my files, so I copied it for you. But anyway, this one, these are also on the ODE, where you have them separately by proficiency level. So this one, you can't see it very well, but it says intermediate mid-presentational. So no, this was not an email reply. This was an essay. Take that back. It was an essay. I know that when I read that presentational. But anyway, and you know, in Ohio, we were working on intermediate mid 1, 2, and 3. Well, anyway, still though, here's how the student gave feedback. You know, what are my strengths? What are my goals? So these can be really used for reflection and goal setting, reflection and goal setting. But I use the can-do statements more for goal setting, but they also reflect after they get it back. It can be for both, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you'll hear me refer to them later too. You're the facilitator. You guide them to know where they are and lead them to grow their proficiency. I like to do that by stating the goals daily. What are my can-dos? I have them every day in the classroom, and the students verbalize them because I have students start class for me. I call them class officers. And you know, when I have my goals all set for my lessons, I build my lessons based on the goals. What is it students are going to be able to do? What is it I want them to do? What can they do? I think of those can-do statements, think of backward design, and that's how I build my lesson. Thinking of those, trying to get all 3 modes in as much as I can every day, and the 11 contents. Well, not all 11 content standards, but considering those. And I bring the can-do goals full circle in my daily lessons. I come back to them. And maybe we didn't really accomplish them. Maybe this is going to be what we can do. You know, podremos, we will be able to do something rather than we are able, because they're not able to yet. And, but let's say that it was, my can-do statement was, I can give advice to a friend who's having problems in math class. Maybe at the end of the period before the class is over, I might say, turn to your friend and give some advice or something. But then I'd have the students give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Can I do it or not? I walk around, I kind of see, what do I see going on? What do I hear? Are they able to or not? I can make a decision on what to order at an online shopping site in Paris. Maybe we've been on Galerie Lafayette and I told the students to go shopping for some new shoes. And, you know, they have to like compare prices and, you know, styles and all that. Did they understand? And could they tell me, Madame, you know, je vais acheter whatever pair of shoes and why, you know, les chaussures coûtent, what they're like, whatever. But the point is, I can do that. I try to bring it full circle, beginning and end, because I want them to put the goal on communication, not on the grammar and vocabulary. I guide them to know where they are and what I want them to be able to do. And, you know, we're going to take a look. We're moving on to the third essential question. Now we're going to see a lot more reflection. Okay. What does task-related student reflection look like? Again, thinking about these stairs and how important it is to stumble and fall sometimes and get back up and learn from our mistakes and keep going. And, you know, thinking about where our students are, I show them these steps and I talk to them about how I'm helping guide them up these stairs. So I like to think of my class as one just big ongoing formative assessment process as they move up the proficiency scale. Of course, I have some summative, you know, assessments. I mean, the whole AP year for me is all formative until that day in May that they take the exam, and then there's their big summative assessment. But my job is to guide and help them to see where they are, to improve and to keep growing. As students reflect, there are a lot of ways we can have them reflect, a lot of different ways, and I have some of them listed right here for you. But it's important for us as teachers to have a plan to inject reflection, that constant reflection, to engage the students in thinking about what I'm doing well and what I need to improve. And it should differ what you choose, the modes you choose, what you choose to do is going to differ depending on a lot of things. Often the task and mode, but also the level the student's at. I mean, how I'm going to ask students to reflect, you know, in a Spanish 4 honors or an AP class is going to be quite different than what I'm going to be able to have them do in a novice level class. And remember, when you are questioning, please remember to allow time to think. I've made the mistake of asking a question that nobody answers, so I provide the answer. Maybe did some of you think this? Did some of you think that? We really need to remember that we have to give kids a time, depending on the proficiency level, to think. I love using quick writes, thought clouds, headlines to represent learning, can-do worksheets. I've already referred to them. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. But whenever you have students reflect, you're going to have to give them some questions, right? Some questions to reflect on. They don't know how to reflect otherwise, like I did on that. Well, I haven't shown you yet. I'm going to show you the reflection for the student that you saw in the video. But here's some examples. Something I learned today that I didn't know before. That's just a quick one, right? Something I'd still like to know. What helped me learn today and why? What was an extra challenge for me and why? How I surprised myself. I like that one because it's positive. Try to always build in some questions about like, what did I do really well? Something I was proud of today. And making that reflection part of the learning process is so important. We need to reflect, and so do our students. That national board certification I went that I went through in 2002 certainly put me on the road to reflection, never stopping. I want my students to do that reflection as well, and they do. Again, it'll differ depending on the level, the students, the task, the mode, all of that. Okay, here's one reflection I have students do. It's simple, they do write, but this was an essay. I have the students in the fall do, around Halloween, because this espantapájaros, the scarecrow, has a pumpkin head, so it seems to be a good time to do it. But this was an essay they had to write on what they learned discussing the message or moral of a short, authentic film. It's about 10 minutes. It's from Spain. It's wonderful. Google it. I have all kinds of materials for it. But after writing the essay and getting my feedback, and I used the Ohio Department of Education, those rubrics I've shown you with the back where they reflect. But this time I had them also write some things here. And what I had them do, what I do well, and errors that I intend to avoid and eliminate to better my writing skills. But I put in parentheses and or speaking, because I could also use this for speaking skills for some other task. The student wrote this in here. I just have this as generic. And it says reflection on my progress with writing, but sometimes I have like a speaking element too, like a conversation or something. Anyway, this student really reflected, saying I did well with explaining my idea. I did well using vocabulary from the Legend of the Scarecrow. I did well using vocabulary from the dictionary. I did well with my thesis. She had a really good thesis statement, I remember, and I did well using evidence. They had to give evidence from watching the film that backed up what they were saying. And errors that I intend, you probably can all tell, even if you're not Spanish teachers, that these all have to do with grammar. You see the cognates there, right? And that often happens. Students find that they do well on the task because I've explained it to them well. They understand the task very well because I always give guidelines, like the one I showed you for the restaurant project. They have guidelines, but often where they need to improve is in the language. But I don't want to make it all about that. As I'm getting kids to reflect, I'm trying to figure out whether it's Flipgrid or a headline that they're going to put above their head saying, this is me today. I was able to give a really great cultural comparison, or whatever it happens to be. I also like to give that. I also believe that we should have some reflection questions. And these are some questions very appropriate for world language education. They can be oral or written. I could do a Flipgrid and ask them questions. ¿Qué evidencia usaste en tu comparación cultural? ¿Qué opinas? What is your opinion about the evidence that you used? Should you have used more or less? Right here. Or does my work truly reflect my effort? Have a student reflect on that. How's my register? Is it culturally appropriate? Now, if it was a formal email, and they used, hey, ¿qué onda? What's going on? No, not so, it just depends. Am I proud of my work? For speaking, I'm going to jump down to the third word. Is there evidence of regionalisms and idiomatic expressions, or do they sound like an American trying to learn, or an English speaker trying to learn Spanish or French or whatever it is? Do they understand that when they give their age, it needs to be, j'ai, whatever number of on, Culture. What did I learn about culture? Products, practices, perspectives. How did I use what I researched in my communication? I mean, depending on the level. I mean, we have to understand the level of the student. You're not going to ask some of these questions, definitely not in a first year class. I probably gave you some more for 3, 4, and AP here, but you could drill these down to very simple questions. But we want to think about the mode, the task, and who the students are and their needs, and give them something that's really meaningful for them to understand where they are. And also, reflection can go from simple monitoring questions and quick feedback to something more detailed, like you just saw here, or I'm going to show you afterward. Okay. It could be before the end of class. It could be when I'm making a transition to another activity in class. I feel good about, I still need work with. Could be a thumbs up, a thumbs down. On the way out the door, an exit ticket, check boxes, a quick statement. They have to tell me a success I had today on the way out the door. It could be something simple as that. They're reflecting and they're giving me feedback as well. or it can be something more substantial. I'm very lucky. We at the Community School of Naples use materials that are, we actually have textbooks that have a lot of authentic resources and are very proficiency based. And this is because in my Spanish 4 class, I use Imagina. And in Imagina, we happen to have can-do, little packets of can-do statements about every aspect of the learning in that lesson. And here the learning was some readings called Galeria de Creadores. It's a gallery of creators. And here there's Mario Vargas Llosa, because as we know, he's a great writer and he's, you know, a Nobel winner and all of that. But they also had Tania Libertad and other people I won't take time to read. But, you know, how am I doing? Am I excelente? Muy bien, más o menos. Es difícil. Ayúdame. No entiendo nada, señora. You know, I mean, if they're doing excellent, that's because they know it well. And if they understood it, wanted to teach it to somebody, explain it to somebody. This was interpretive, obviously an interpretive. But and then I always leave room, give me some details. Now, if it is a 4th year student, 3rd year student, they can probably write quite a bit in Spanish. In my 1s and 2s, I often allow, but some of them don't do it. They want to do Spanish. I'll allow them to reflect in English because I'm afraid that if I don't, they won't reflect. You know, they'll avoid it. I don't want them to avoid it. I don't want to be a hardship on them to reflect. Here's another one. This is from D'accord, and the students watched a video called, it's Le Zapping. We have those in all the chapters, and they're authentic video, authentic audio video usually. And again, it's can-do language. And here we had 3. We had interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational, because they interpreted this and then they got to speak with a classmate about the technology and write something. But again, it goes from formidable, I know this well enough to teach it, to au secours, I can't even do this without help me, I need this, you know, but this is another way to reflect on their learning. This is a screenshot I gave you of a document I have that I use in AP Spanish for the cultural comparison. And I'm using it as an example for you. You don't have to teach AP to use something like this, but it's task-based reflection with details based on scoring guidelines or rubrics. So whatever rubric you're using for something, think of making a little table of such for students with those little bullet points and having the students provide their evidence. In this case, the cultural comparison in Spanish is they have some kind of a guiding question, like here it says, how have national heroes affected life of the people in your community? And then there's a second part of that, compare a community with a Spanish-speaking community with which you are familiar with your community or another community. That's the updated question in case there's some AP teachers here. Notice target culture first. All right, but anyway, so they needed to, you know, think of a Spanish-speaking community that they could talk about and compare national heroes in that community in their own. So for example, one piece of the AP scoring guideline is using details and evidence, right? That they give details and evidence. So for example, I've referred to relevant examples and specific details from my past learning, my observations and experiences to compare and contrast the 2 cultures. They have to provide evidence. What I do with this is I give this sometimes before the student even gives it to me to grade. They have recorded. I have them listen to themselves and provide the evidence. I listen to it and I see how well they did. I add to it. I decide their score. They have to, you can't see the bottom of this, but they get to evaluate themselves what they think they deserve, what the strengths and weaknesses of their presentation are. I'll give this to you and I'll give it to you in English too, for people who aren't Spanish speakers. But anyway, the reason I use this is, and the reason I'm showing you this, I know you're not all AP teachers, is that whenever you use a rubric, you could think of formulating some reflection questions, or you don't even have to put them in question form. Here, I've included an effective introduction in which I give my intent or my purpose or an appropriate thesis according to the theme or the question. So, you know, it could be, I'm well organized. Is my presentation well organized? And I maybe have some examples of transitions. You know, some are about the what, the task itself, and some are about the how. I like to do that. I like to talk about the task and then how well, because often they do well on the task and it helps prop up the grade a bit, which is important. I want to build their confidence. So you could do this at any level with any scoring guideline. I just happen to have this one for AP and I showed it to you. I also do some reflection mid-year. So it can be task related, you know, on a project or task, any of these things that I've shown you here. But this is one that I do in AP again, mid-year, where I evaluate where are we and what do we need before May. And I actually have the students, it's about a 5-page reflection piece. For example, here it's about, this is a French version of it for the argumentative essay. You know, what I do well, what I should improve, and what I should do. What do I intend to do to improve? And I sit with the students and we develop a plan for how to address their individual needs, kind of a prescription. Maybe like with their ongoing, I do these tablas de noticias where they have to listen, and they have like 14 entries every month, listen and read news from all the different themes. Maybe if a student tells me, well, I have so much knowledge and I've used so much vocabulary for, let's say science and technology, but you know what? I think I need more for beauty and aesthetics. I might tailor that. Your next tablas de noticias, make it total beauty and aesthetics or something like that. I won't go into a lot of detail, but you could do that with any of your students, especially students who have struggled or that need some extra help. Maybe do a checkpoint during the year and kind of assess where they are. You don't have to. Let's go back to my student now, and I'm not going to play her again, but I do want to show you the reflection piece that I had for this project for her class. It's the reflection of my success. I like to keep it positive, the restaurant project. And I say, please answer these questions as a reflection of your experience. First, watch your video and think about these considerations, the content and the sections of the task. That would be going back to that task sheet I showed you. Consider your use of Spanish, and also consider these I can statements, which I gave them the can do statements that I was targeting. And I asked, what are you very proud of? What did you do well? What parts of the project did you not do as well? How can you improve the next time? What do you think about your quality of Spanish? Okay. And of course, here I have a couple bullets to help her, like really good use of vocabulary and grammar, some problems. What are they? And this is what she wrote. I put this on our LMS blog. I made a blog of that whole thing that you just saw, and she put it into a paragraph. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she started out saying, I'm very proud that I understand all that the server said. Besides, I can speak with ease, and I wasn't nervous when I ordered food. It was interesting that she said, where was it? She talked about forgetting the word for flour. She said, I think that the quality of my Spanish is better than last year. We did this in the fall. You know, so, and although I have errors, I believe I won't read the whole thing. She says she has a fundamental level to communicate with Spanish speakers. I thought that was a good reflection. She had an opportunity to look at her particular errors, you know, using the ODE rubrics or the ODE reflection piece. Sorry, it's not a rubric. Well, it is too, but all right. Something else that you have available to you, whether you give the stamp test or not, we give the stamp test to all our students, the community school every year. And I'll have students come to me because they're really involved in this reflection. They want to do better because they want the global seal. Well, you know, I got 6s on all parts. 6s intermediate high, you know, on my interpersonal writing and my presentation. You know, they got 6s on everything, but why did I only have a 5 on listening? What was the problem? You know, or, you know, on my speaking's only a 4. What can I do? And a 4 is intermediate low. So here's an example. Avant Assessment, and there's a link for you here, has power up tools, telling students where they are. So a level, it says level 4, but that means a 4, intermediate low. A 4 is intermediate low, a 5 is intermediate mid, a 6 is intermediate high. Well, for them to go, it shows them how to move from a 4 to a 5, like increase text type, strive to use different forms of added detail, try to add elements of complexity to your sentence structures, etc. I don't have time now because I'm going to try to keep this to an hour, but you can get these through this link for all different levels, how to move. You do need to know, you know, what the stamp scores are, but you can see them there. But here it's moving from intermediate low to intermediate mid. These are available to you. If they help you, please use them. Also, intercultural reflection. I love to do intercultural reflection, and this page is all about that. I asked some guiding questions. What is the importance of New Year in the life and traditions of people in a Spanish-speaking community with which you're familiar? What is the importance of New Year in your community? What are the products and important practices of the two communities that are part of the celebration of New Year's? Now, you may not, maybe you've already figured it out. I'm getting ready for a cultural comparison, and this was a Spanish 4 class because I start that before AP. And then I have my can-do statements that go along with it. But this is all helping reflect for intercultural learning, identifying what the student needs to investigate. Maybe they're going to go to some authentic resources, or I give them some authentic resources for investigating to give them the evidence they're going to need to be able to interact and talk about this. And I do think it's really important that we don't let students get negative about their learning. So these ideas of growth mindset, I have them in French and Spanish that I'll be putting in the folder for you, and I've given them to Dana. Like, instead of thinking it's too difficult, c'est trop difficile, il me faut plus de temps. I just need more time and effort. Plus de temps et d'effort. Or instead of, oh, I'll never be able to do it like them. What can I learn from them? So I'm going to give you these. I think this is other reflection. You know, when you see kids, help them reflect on what the positive side of things. Turn every negative or every roadblock into a plan for success. And, you know, as we help the students be more proficient, then they get those credentials, those wonderful, you know, state seal of biliteracy, or in this case, global seal of biliteracy. This was a picture of some of my students after we presented these in 2019, because we couldn't do it last year. We had to just send them to them. This is a little girl. She has two because she did Chinese and Spanish. But, you know, it all goes down to the involve me and I learn, involve me in my own learning, involve me in my reflection. So going back to these essential questions, I hope that we have addressed them all, and you can go back through the presentation if you need to. I'd like to thank all of you. Remember, the great teacher inspires. I mean, we have all kinds of teachers, but we all are great teachers. We all want to inspire our students to be part of the learning and to improve. Merci, gracias, dankeschön, Cecilia. It has been such a pleasure to be with my dear colleagues in Stark County. Here's my email if you need me. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of this conference, and I hope that you will continue the conversation on reflection and goal setting for student success. Bye-bye.